Welcome, good morning. I guess it's a little bit good morning, as we say in Norwegian. And welcome to this keynote and roundtable session on gender lawfare in legal and digital arenas. My name is Kari Jegerstedt. I'm the head of the Center for Women's and Gender Studies here at the University of Bergen, and I will moderate the session. The anti-gender movement, or the organized and heavily sponsored mobilization against gender equality, LGBTQ plus rights, reproductive justice, and a broader human rights framework, has been on the rise since the mid-1990s, and we witness their influence in major pushbacks against human rights globally. How do they work, and how can they be resisted? Rooted in authoritarian, religious, and nationalist ideologies, the anti-gender movement and digital is sophisticated and strategically transnational. Social media platforms serve as key arenas for narrative control, disinformation, and identity formation, particularly among young men, while also shaping legal discourse and amplifying backlash. This session explores gender lawfare, the strategic deployment of legal and discursive tools, both online and offline, to enforce or resist gender norms. We ask how anti-gender actors use rights language, moral framings, and legal claims to legitimize repression, and how law and digital technologies intertwine in contemporary struggles over gender justice. What makes anti-gender strategies so politically effective? How are legal categories weaponized or reclaimed both in courtrooms and digital spaces? And how can scholars and activists push back against this converging legal and cultural backlash? To shed light on these questions, and they are by no means small questions and very, very pressing questions, we are very pleased to welcome as a keynote Associate Professor at the University of Massachusetts and Adjunct Professor at the Center for Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Bergen, Dr. Svati Shah. Dr. Shah is an anthropologist and queer feminist scholar who work on questions on sexuality, gender, migration, and caste capitalism in India. Their publications include the ethnographic monograph Street Corner Secrets, Sex, Work and Migration in the City of Mumbai from 2014. And currently, they are working on a monograph on the shifting political landscapes of queer and transgender social movements in India, especially in the light of the rise of authoritarianism in South Asia. Svati Shah will give a 10-15 minutes long keynote, and after that we have this distinguished panel who will comment also not necessarily on Dr. Shah's keynote but on the issues, and I think I'll just introduce them very, very shortly right away so you know who they are. We have lawyer and human rights advocate Dr. Adrian Jjuuko from Makerere University. We have a PhD student in political science focusing on authoritarian regimes, media, and politics, Fatma Timucin from Syracuse University. We have law and development scholar at FGV Sao Paulo Law School, Dr. Lívia Buzolin, and Virginia Lemme, PhD candidate at the University of Siena, where she's involved with projects concerning human rights and gender equality, her main field being Japanese public law. So, yeah, you can welcome them shortly and then we'll start. And I guess my main job is to keep track of the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kari. Thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you, City, and everyone at CMI and LawTransform. It is so special to be part of the Bergen Exchanges, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we have today. So I am going to be trying to do many things in 15 minutes, and I thought, unlike my usual thing of making notes and then going off script, I'm going to tell you what my presentation is meant to do, and then if I get through it all, then hooray for me. So first I want to provide some history and context for this thing that gets called anti-gender politics, movement, discourse. And then I want to talk about the legal context for trans rights and backlash against gender equality in India. And those are related, but they're not the same. So one of the points I want to make in this talk is that the anti-gender movement, as we experience it in Europe, in the Western Hemisphere, in places that are very much within the ambit of Judeo-Christianity, it does not operate this way in India, but that's not to say that some of the effects of the anti-gender politics are not being felt in India. I am then going to try to talk about some of the intersections between trans rights and Hindu nationalism and the pushback against Hindu nationalism in India, and then end with something that some colleagues of mine who study political theory in South Asia are calling the post-national episteme, and the ways in which it has become very hard for people to get out of their echo chambers and their sort of digital landscapes, and how much that's affecting the possibility of things like class solidarity in the face of kind of autocratic hoovering up of all the resources everywhere. Okay, so some history and context. One of the things that's always been very concerning about the anti-gender movement is its alignments. It's not just about trans people, it's not just about women, it's about capital, it's about claiming land. It's been a set of politics that's been very worried about political mobilization. In India, the same forces that seek to disenfranchise poor people, people of marginalized castes, women are also people who are criminalizing protest, particularly protest against the genocide in Gaza. The state has cracked down very hard against those protests, and that's historically a very idiosyncratic thing. The Indian government was very much an ally and friend of the people of Palestine from 1947 till 2014. So anything that I say today should be taken within that context, that there is a kind of generalized shrinking of spaces for both civil society and political society to function. And it is within that larger framework that I think we need to understand the pushback against gender rights. So yesterday, Payam was talking about this sort of celebratory, hopeful moment of early human rights law in the early to mid 1990s, and it made me think about how that was also a hopeful moment for international women's rights, as it was called at the time. The International Conference on Population and Development in 1994 in Cairo, the International Conference on Women in Beijing, were extremely hopeful moments in which slogans like women's rights or human rights were being forwarded, and a sort of agenda around women's health that included reproductive rights. So this made certain governments and the Vatican freak out, and they said things like the inclusion of terms like reproductive rights and gender equality implicitly endorsed abortion as practice and would undermine the family structure. And I think we may tend to forget in our time that anti-gender movements are about reinforcing and reifying an unequal power structure between men and women. The name for that on the right is the family. So that is actually what's at stake for them. And trans people are like, we are like the kind of low-hanging fruit, you know, the kind of look at these freaks. You don't want your kids to be freaks like this. You don't want to turn your kids into freaks. But actually what they want is to disenfranchise women. And the American Defense Secretary has come out and said women should not have the right to vote. The Indian government in this so-called electoral roll revision exercise that they did in one of the poorest states in India, in the east, in the state of Bihar, they overnight disenfranchised 6.5 million people, 55% of them were women. So this was not a kind of, a targeted exercise of, well, women are going to not vote for us, as it would be in the US perhaps, but it was taking advantage of, patrilineal householding, men hold all the documents, women don't necessarily get access to them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really what's at stake here. Now, there is no so-called J.K. Rowling scenario in India. There isn't a kind of turf nationalism that's coming for trans people because because of the rhetoric that it undermines women's rights and women's autonomy and women's safety. But there is a complicated legal context in which all kinds of rights are being rolled back. And certainly feminist movements are being targeted within this rollback. So specifically, if you just want to talk about queer and trans rights in India, the two signal moments that you probably know about are in 2018, the anti-sodomy law that had been in place since 1860, since the institution of the Indian Penal Code under the British Raj, was read down, which means that the law, that's okay, the law that, that governed consensual sex between people of the same sex who were adults, as well as sexual violence against children, all came under the so-called Unnatural Offenses Act, which we colloquially called the anti-sodomy law. So in 2018, it was read down in that the part of the law that criminalized sex between adults was removed, taken off after a more than 20-year-long campaign, and that becomes important in a second, why I'm saying that the campaign was so long. In 2019, the Indian government adopts the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act, which includes welfare provisions for trans people. Now, the anti-sodomy law campaign being so long is important because in the early 2000s, the late 90s and early 2000s, when it really got going, it was very much informed by the politics of HIV/AIDS. It was argued that criminalizing queer and trans people, which is how it was used, was also a detriment to HIV prevention efforts. So this meant that there was a coalition of people who were trying to argue for the reading down of anti-sodomy. It was sex workers, it was trans folks, it was queer folks, and there was a strong commitment to anti-class and anti-caste politics. And this was evinced in the petitioners for the various legal battles in the New Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court. The petitioners were extremely diverse. Cut to 2018 when the final petitioners in that case were actually urban elites. All of the rhetoric of class and caste had been kind of essentially excised, and it was the petition was presented as a privacy rights petition, not as a kind of a way to talk about police violence against a range of sexuality and gender minorities. The Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act did try to remedy some of this. It wasn't necessarily in direct relation to that problem, but it was trying to address the ways that trans feminine people, hijras in particular, a sort of recognized sexual and gender minority that has been present in Indian public life since the medieval period at least, were given kind of quotas, affirmative action for public jobs, jobs in the railway sector and other places. But as you can imagine, the enforcement of those efforts were less than satisfactory, and there's a lot of both transphobia as well as casteism involved in why those provisions haven't been enforced. So there's a couple of things to understand here. One, yes, there is a kind of embrace of trans rights within Indian political sphere, but that embrace comes with the idea that Hinduism is ahistorical and has always been tolerant of sexual minorities. So it's very much couched within an anti-Muslim rhetoric, which is important to understand in the context of Hindu nationalism. So that the embrace, it's a very, what's that? It's a poison chalice. It's a poison chalice. It comes with a lot of baggage. The other thing to understand is that this poison chalice is also about the erasure of transmasculine transness. So it is an embrace of trans people, but that embrace of trans people is still accompanied by the hierarchical regulation of people assigned female sex at birth, and the kind of erasure of trans masculinity from this public sphere, which is not to say that trans men and trans masculine people aren't visibly involved in things like autonomous feminism, in the Indian New Left, in the Indian Party Left. There is a lot of amazing radical queer and trans organizing and strategizing and thinking going on, which is the topic of my book, which is why I'm saying that. Okay. The last thing I'll say is that political theorists like Mary John and Satish Deshpande, people who are part of the generation of Indian scholars that have been pushed out, not pushed out exactly, but have retired and not been replaced, in part due to the kind of nationalism that and pushback against scholarship that we're witnessing in India, in the US, in Hungary, and other places that have this sort of rise of autocratic illiberalism. Something that they have been talking about is a post-national episteme, and they're using post-national to, well, I'll just read a quote from Mary John. By post-national, I mean a situation where the nation is no longer the obvious or only horizon or frame of reference for our questions and critiques. As a collective statement introducing the post-national condition, it signals an intellectual condition, a position of critique, a horizon of intelligibility beyond that constituted by the nation state in its heyday. In other words, the post-national is a way to talk about the fissures in the idea of the nation, and those fissures are both related to caste and class hierarchies, but they are also related to the way that political difference and identitarian difference is amplified within the echo chambers of social media, and the ways in which that has impacted political culture. I would say probably a little bit more in the West than in India because of the kind of very diverse way that people use social media and phones and things like that in India. But I find that this episteme is very useful for thinking about some of the ways that it's been hard to mobilize solidarities and the way that it might have been more possible in the 90s. Okay, so the last thing I'll say is a small plea for thinking about the academy in the way that Payom was talking about the ICC yesterday. What I have just done is an example of the kind of scholarship that is possible in a functional university. The reason why universities are under attack is because this kind of thinking does threaten the power structure. Even if we don't think it does, it actually does, which is why they don't want to replace our lines. They don't want to give us graduate students to train. They don't want us to talk like this. So if it's good that the ICC is being infiltrated by Russians pretending to be Brazilians, it is also good that this is frightening them, and we should keep doing it.
Thank you, Svati. I'll just pass the word down, and then we'll start with Dr. Jjuuko. If you would like to give your response to the questions posed.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for that background on India. I'm going to go directly to Uganda. Yeah, that's all I know, and like I said last time, real existential issues at the moment that we have to deal with, and digital space becomes very important when there's no more physical space to engage with. Right now, I told you yesterday about the criminality of the physical space. Of course, it's also criminality of the digital space in many ways, but there is a feeling that you can be anonymous a bit when you are online. There are certain things you may not do physically, you may not match, but you'll certainly be able to post something on X or to post a video on TikTok. And this gives you a space where you can actually easily express yourself and easily mobilize. And this is a space that has been used mainly by trans women in Uganda. They are actually, we have now some trans women who are stars, celebrities on TikTok. And it's an interesting thing how people engage with such videos. There is a little, what do they call them? It's not a meme, it's, no, these reactions that people send, the small, is it? Yes, the GIF, yes. There's one that shows someone who appears like a trans woman. And then there's been some reactions about don't spread it further. You're spreading homosexuality, you're spreading transgenderism in Uganda. So people use it all the time, and then now people are like, please stop using it. You're just promoting, everything seems to be about promoting homosexuality, promoting transgenderism. But for me, the fact that people cannot be like, okay, what is this? But also the fact that it's gaining loads, use in the community, that becomes really important. So the online space becomes a space where you can engage, where you can be yourself in most cases, but also where you can fight back. And like I've said, people are gaining the popularity and people are becoming celebrities only. So it's kind of a safe space in many ways. And a safe space that has not been so much interrupted by the government for now. Yesterday someone was asking me, how can you joke about Uganda and death penalties and 20 years imprisonment? And I told them, well, Uganda is interesting because unless they want you so much for something much more political, they may not come for you now. The danger about having the law is that they can come for you at any time, right? But not now. Until you say, well, Museveni, you've been here for too long. They're like, okay, Museveni, what do you want with him? So there are times when they can use the law against you and there are times when they won't use the law against you. For example, if you look at Stella Nyanzi and her politics and how she was engaging on menstrual issues for women and all that, and then she got arrested, and now she's no longer even in the country because she got charged with an offense under the Computer Misuse Act. So when things go off, they're going to use the Computer Misuse Act against you, and you're going to be pushed out. And nowadays, saying Museveni's wife is not the most beautiful, something like that, might land you into trouble. His son keeps a basement where he keeps you in case you cause trouble. So there is the ability of this translating from online into actual physical abuse and torture, and that happens some of the time. So online is a beautiful place for mobilization, but also it can cause you trouble. But yesterday I spoke about the Gen Z riots, the demonstration that we had. All of it was almost done online, and usually done by young women, usually done by people in the sexual minorities movement, also are standing up to be counted. So online mobilization and engagement, of course, Museveni has some usual tricks up his sleeve. He closes down the internet for that day, like he does usually during elections. But all the same people are mobilizing online. People know how they can know about phone security and how to protect themselves online. But also, the other side is fighting back. Like, okay, you can engage online. We can also engage online. So there's a very increased use of bots. People who write, are they people or they're computers? Okay, programs, which are robots, which are going to amplify the message of the other group as much as possible. It's going to be all over. And the messages that are usually pushed like that are messages that are usually very much against women, very much anti-gender, very much anti-LGBT, very much anti-trans all the time. They gain some sort of mainstream acceptance because of the way everyone is coming out. There are usually some little, for instance, have you seen the little accounts with flags, Uganda flags? We have them like, they have little Uganda flags, then you know, this one with the Uganda flag, this is not a real person, this must be a bot. So the use of bots is also gaining quite a lot of prominence, and they use them actively and much more efficiently against gender rights. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll just go and give the word to you, Virginia.
Thank you. Hi, welcome. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful panel. So I want to give a testimony from Italy, and I'm doing that both as a scholar, but also as a practitioner, because I'm also an activist. And I think that the Italian context is particularly important since the anti-gender movement is now within the government, because Maloney's government is putting in place something that has been called by Professor Dixon as a form of abusive feminism. So I just want to raise some of the strategy that Maloney's government is putting in place in recent times. So one of those is the strategic use of language, and in particular everything that pertains to LGBTQI issues. It's called under the label of ideologia gender, and the word gender is strategically not translated into Italian because it's a way of making the enemy even more frightening, because it's intersecting with other illiberal feelings such as racism, which is really powerful in Italy right now due also to the migration crisis. So another strategy that pertains to language is the strategic use of human rights language. So when it pertains, for example, to sexual reproductive rights, it's never going to say, okay, against the autonomy of the mother to decide whether or not to get an abortion, but it's also always pro-life, or rather pro the decision of the father. So this is a strategic use of human rights and language. Also, another strategic use is the use of the tool of the populist rhetoric. So it's always fragmenting the public sphere, so dividing the public sphere into the people and the elites, which are in Italy the so-called lobby gay, whatever it means. And another way of fragmenting the public sphere that the government is putting in place is putting the women community and feminist community against the queer communities. And it's doing it in many and different arenas. So for example, it's always reinforcing the rhetoric of trans people being against and a threat of women's rights. And it's doing it in different arenas, so not only the social arenas, but also the legislative arenas in recent times. And it's doing it so at the moment with a bill that is now being discussed that is about sexual education in schools, that it's both the aim is both to, of course, give more education about queer rights and everything, and also against gender based violence. But the government is trying to fragment and putting consent, parental consent, for the kids to access to gender ideology-related issues. So I'm really concerned about the situation in Italy because it's an abusive form, and the fact that a woman is doing it, so reinforcing the descriptive way of the fact that she's a mother, a Christian, a woman, but from the inside, she's actually going against not only women's rights, but everyone's right. So I just want to put that on the table. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Fatma, Timucin. Thank you to Svati and my fellow panelists for the discussion. I'll be not exactly commenting on the keynote, but more about the digital arena part of our panel, because I believe it is increasingly relevant to the rhetoric surrounding the anti-gender lawfare we have. So far, the social media has played a significant role in the feminist and queer movements, and mobilizing protests, but also connecting people and organizations in, for those in vulnerable positions, and creating a sense of community, inclusive online communities. When it comes to the anti-gender movement, I think it is less about mobilizing people in the traditional sense, but more about creating a discourse, usually a misogynistic discourse they have, and significant in shaping the discourse and far-right parties. Two prominent examples I can think of are, I think, the incel, involuntary celibate movement, and also the red pill movement, as I'm sure anyone who spends time on Reddit or online spaces have been exposed to against their will. both of these are predominantly young male-oriented, and they believe that they've been wronged by the societal order we have right now, that the feminism has gone too far, states are now favoring women at the expense of young men, and men are being taken advantage of, especially when it comes to laws regarding child custody and also alimony after marriage. I think they differ from social movements we have, because these don't exactly demand social or policy changes, and they don't mobilize, but we can undeniably see that they create a misogynistic discourse and a sense of belonging and community for their members. This can be especially destructive because the creator of the incel movement, Elliot Rodger, broke into a sorority and claimed the lives of 6 women before taking his own. So at the extremes, it can result in femicide. Although the entire movement is not displaying violent tendencies as this, you can still see that they usually celebrate news regarding domestic violence, for example, as results of women facing the consequences of their partner choices, etc. So it is concerning that they're normalizing this kind of radical perspectives and celebrating violence. Most of these men also vote for radical right parties, so you can see that what they demand from democracy seems to be reduced to just restricting the gains from the feminist movement, or more extremely, just removing what feminist movement have gained so far. For the US case, one of the phrases that became popular is the repeal the 19th Amendment. And 19th Amendment is the one which gave the woman the right to vote. And the last point I want to make is that how these misogynistic, anti-gender rhetoric has become transnational thanks to the digital space. I'm from Turkey. We have a population of 85 million. And social media is hugely popular. Around 70% of that population actively uses social media. And Twitter is especially popular among young population. The far-right male side of that platform borrows the same terminology and issues from the US far-right. You can see them complaining about the woke culture and how homosexuality is everywhere. Same-sex marriage is not even legal in Turkey, so like what they're complaining about does not even exist, but they're just mimicking what the US counterpart is saying. So especially with the discussion around declining birth rates around the world, I think now they're gaining even more platform because they're also centering the issue of family units and how giving more right to women is detrimental to the family unit and the society as a whole. So sorry for not being able to end on a more positive note, but I think it's especially worrisome that this anti-gender, anti-liberal democracy rhetoric is gaining traction on a global scale. And I think the digital space is perpetuating this discourse even further.
Lívia, Buzolin, please.
Hi, so glad that I'm the last one, and I mean, I think almost everything has been said and all the concepts were touched. So I will just bring a little bit about the Latin American context on the anti-gender politics, but also what I think is the societal and how it communicates what's happening on ground, especially in Brazil. So we have been talking a lot about Bolsonaro, which was the Brazilian president from 2019 until 2022. And he is he fits this new autocrat way of ruling. And as to new autocrats, they can at least act in 2 different ways regarding gender and women's rights and LGBTQ rights. One, they can use at their own purpose to gain power, and in the other hand, they can undermine those rights to spread fear and tie the conservative community together. So Bolsonaro went for the second one, and he was, I think, the guide in Latin America. Now he's been a lot of things that he's done has been copied by Milei in Argentina, and probably will be copied by other leaders in the region. So what I think that they did, like Bolsonaro did, Milei's copying also very much expired in Orbán and in Trump, is a 5-step politics. So first they campaign with fear, then blame the left for everything that happened prior to them, because in Latin America we had this huge period, the pink tide that they call that, from leftist governments. And then once they are in power, they reinforce this rhetoric of gender ideology, the risks it poses for the natural family, the heterosexual way of living, the Christian family, and then they try to dismantle previous policies. And for the fifth thing that is the most effective one, in my view, is that they turn people against each other. And when they turn people against each other, social media and internet is really an instrument for doing it. They usually use a lot of WhatsApp groups to spread misinformation. But to give a more a concrete example of how this has been done at state level. So in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, we had our female chief of cabinet of the Ministry of Women, Human Rights and Family, which again resonates what Virginia was saying about the use of female figures in that sense. And she added gender ideology as a human rights violation. So you could call the hotlines for the government hotlines to do a complaint about the misuse of gender ideology, the indoctrination at schools, and how communism and Marxism ideas were being spread by teachers at schools. And you could think that would be like an empty threat, but actually people use internet and they call and they recorded professors. So some principals in Rio de Janeiro were summoned to testify before the police about this indoctrination at schools. And then that was happening, and the Supreme Court was action and everything, and then it was removed. But then once after Milei was elected in 2023 after Bolsonaro, so he did even a more technological approach. So they had a QR code that you could just scan and make your complaint. So that you can see that's how the persecution is being copied elsewhere. But what I think is not only a state, and more to the question, why does that policies are being implemented? Why is this kind of sticking to these governments? Why is in some point successful, right? So I think specifically in the Brazilian case, it has been followed by a very change in society identity per se for the conservative and the right-wing people that wants to be part of a group that they felt they were being excluded. So to give another example, after Bolsonaro lost the re-election, they did this research, this poll to understand what his voters were feeling at that point. It also resonates a little bit about what was being saying yesterday about the emotions and the power of it. And they felt a lot of resentment towards the LGBTQI community because they felt they lost a space to these people. So that was the feeling, resentment, right? And you can see that in the 2010, 2015, when this conservative movement started to gain a lot of force in Latin America, there was a discourse attached to it that was anti-corruption discourse. So everybody can be against corruption, right? It's like normal. But they were united in that front. But then when the corruption became apparent also in Bolsonaro's government, they shaped to adapt, and now they are more anti-gender discourse. So the new identity for this usually middle class, white, male, straight guy, Christian with no disability available, disposable, is being against sex education because it will lead their kids to turn trans kids or gay kids at schools. And second hand, to be very against abortion. So the abortion field in the Congress and in society is really strong. And but I think those, I can't tell what came first, if it was in the state arena or in the society arena, but they are very much tied in speaking to each other in communication. And in my sense, that's why made so powerful. And they still lingers even though Bolsonaro is not in power anymore. So thank you.
It feels kind of weird clapping after all this depressing news. And also, I could give a lot of examples of how exactly the same kind of rhetoric is being pushed in Norway at the present time. I will not go into that, I'm sure you know. I haven't been very good at keeping track of the time. I'm sorry for that. I was lost in all your talks. So I was just thinking that I would open the floor for questions right away. We have 16 minutes. We could continue this discussion for the rest of the day, but we only have like 1 minute each for you to address these questions. I hear strategies, language, social media coming up a lot, but we will just take it as a closing remark to kind of, and we'll read a lot of the questions as comments actually also on what is at stake here. So Svati, would you care to start?
Thank you again for being here and for all of this wonderful engagement. I'm going to be selective about what I address because I only have a minute. So I guess the main point I'm trying to make is that anti-gender rhetoric is actually not a through line through every single place in the world. What is a through line is the allegiance that autocrats have to gender inequality. So anti-gender movements is one thing that's happening in the Judeo-Christian world, and it has its root in the Vatican. The Vatican invented the term anti-gender. But you know, in places like China and India, which are not Christian countries, something else is going on. There are other histories. I'm not speaking to China, but at least in India, if we're trying to look for some connection with what's happening in the West around illiberalism and autocracy's relationship to gender, it would be in reifying gender hierarchy. Now, one way that that looks in India is not an anti-trans rhetoric, it is a very pro-caste rhetoric. So it's anti-intercaste marriage, it's anti-interreligious marriage, and it is very much anti-Muslim. And all of that has to be factored into a place that is frankly where a quarter of humanity lives, if we take Namita's statistics from yesterday about South Asia. You know, regarding framing, I think another way to think about framing is why are terrorism and Islam often conflated? The US military engages in drug trafficking and sexual violence and acts as a rogue terror organization in most of the world. What is happening in Palestine is terror against the people of Palestine. So the fact that there was I would call it a right-wing attack against Pride in Norway, and we face similar attacks against white nationalists in the West when we try to assert our rights as queer and trans people. So I think that the rhetoric of anti-Muslim sentiment that is driving a lot of this kind of rise of autocracy is really something that we in particular are both positioned to and have an obligation to think about in a more complicated way.
Thank you. We'll just clap when it's all over because we don't have time for more clapping.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to address Jeff's comment a bit about that different strategies, that we are using the same platforms, but they are also profoundly different in different ways. I just reflected a bit on that, and I really think the real underlying factor why they are really different is because one group has it all. They are not criminalized. They are free to say whatever they want. And then the other group, you go out of line, they are going to bash you in. I think that's the comment I would say why we are really different, and you can't exactly adopt their strategies, because if you do, that's going to be dangerous for you. So you have to deal with what you can. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I want just to address 2 points briefly. So about the fact that it was a gay man that actually allied with Bolsonaro, that is the tricky point of actual and nowadays authoritarian system. They're using abusive borrowing. So it's really hard to detect, but the way to do it maybe is just to go to the substance of what they're putting in place and not just the descriptive representation of them as a person. So regarding the mistakes of strategies, yes, probably. Yeah, we made some strategic mistakes, but now what we're trying to do is to consolidate the rights that we already have, because it's not the perfect time to advance a progressive agenda, and we're doing that, for example, in the abortion field, because in Italy, of course, we have a law, but we have contentious objection that it's really, in some regions, 80% of practitioners are contentious objection. So now we're just trying to reinforce and consolidate that structure. And sorry, I'm over time.
Thank you.
I'll try to address the question that was directed at me, but I think it's kind of unfair. It's impossible to answer, like, how do we save the young men from this, especially under 1 minute. But I think, like, at least about the reasons for it, it's also amalgamation of different things. In the incel community, they also follow like strict eugenics, how they praise the white male and adopt the Nazi rhetoric is also, I think, a problem that they have. The intense patriarchy they follow, I think, creates the problem that why they can't have female role models. So probably these male role models they have, the popularity like Andrew Tate or like other tech bros in the online spaces have, makes the problem worse. But I don't have a structural answer to how we can provide these young men with support so they don't turn to these radical right alternatives.
So I think just to address Tom's issue on the distraction that trans LGBTQ rights and women's rights can portray to democracy, I think if they were treated as central matters and not lateral matters, we're not being here today discussing the problem that why we have gender inequality and stuff like that. So that's, for me, the main issue. It also relates to how to regulate social media, but also it's what's the main central thing. If you were talking seriously about women's rights, LGBTQ rights, not as distraction, but central stuff, we would be much more of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we have things to discuss for the rest of the day, and we finished exactly on the second. So thanks to all of you. That was amazing.